How
I don't
much?
want I don't want you guys to see how messy my room is and everything.
Nice. It's okay. Mine's really bad too.
Um,
Can you see us, Nico?
yeah, you guys look good.
Great.
I see Junie there too.
Yeah. You say hi. Well, there's not very many of us, so maybe we can all introduce ourselves so you know who's in the room.
Yeah, who's all there?
I'm here, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Jacinda. Summer. Kenzie. Hey, Nico. Gracie.
How's it going?
Pretty good. How about you?
Good. I'm battling the cold start of a cold right now, but I'm doing all right. I got cough drops and Kleenexes in hand, so you guys might hear me blow the trumpet every now and then.
You can just mute yourself when you need to.
Yeah.
Rach-
Um,
No.
and then I see Levi and Bruno.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, well, you can take it
Yeah,
away, Nico.
sweet. So, um, obviously tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the finances that I've kind of become pretty passionate about. So that's we can get into like very deep things, but I was talking with a lot of my friends and coworkers, and they're like, "Well, maybe you should keep things a little like light because not everybody likes finances as much as you." And I said, "Okay, that's fair." So I've gone a little light. If you guys want to know about stuff, I'll go into it afterwards when we take questions. But I'll try to keep it generally light. What's up?
What should I invest in?
Not gonna answer that.
All right.
um, but general overview is once you're leaving college, there's a lot of things you're gonna have to pay for. So obviously, I think everybody kind of knows that you're gonna have to, um, I guess, once you have a job, or if you're looking for a job, or if you already have a job right now, you're gonna have to look to eventually pay student loans. You're gonna have to look for food, rent, savings, kind of a general overview of things you're gonna have to pay for. Um, but before I talk about what are the specific things you should look for, I want to talk about what is the point of money in our lives. Because a lot of times it takes over in our life when it says, in the word that the money is the root of all evil. And there's certain things that can kind of consume us that I don't want that to be um, your guys' future. And obviously, I didn't want it to be for mine. And I want to kind of be able to speak about that. So, money is a means for us to attain goals in our life. So that could be um, whether you're wanting to do a hobby, whether you're wanting to, obviously, you need to pay to live, and there's all these different things. There's a house that you'd eventually want to get for that's a goal that you want to work in your life. Another goal, and sometimes it's a little ambitious, but to retire before 50, retire before 55, some number that you want to put in there um, that people want to be able to do. Um, and in conjunction with that is okay, so we have this money and we kind of understand that it's meant for some sort of goal that we have in our life, but how should it be used? And the one thing I want to kind of hit home, this is the first big thing that I want to tell you guys is money helps us do life, but it should not be our life. It should not be consuming everything about how you think. So I can kind of go into it later, but when we talk about budgets, I used to constantly be looking at my budget every day and seeing how much have I spent, where am I spending at, how am I doing, am I on track? And it became a very unhealthy thing for me. And I learned that it should not be everything in our life, but it should be a part of it, helping us do life and everything that we do. Okay, so let's say you got your first job, you're looking for a job. I'm just kind of going to go over general what does like being paid look like. So if you were to have we call this W-2. So this is like if you go to employer, they give you a paycheck and you're supposed to um, earn a wage there. There's going to be two different types of buckets that you're generally going to have. And this is kind of for everybody, but I'm kind of going to speak for W-2. If you are going to go into ministry, that's kind of a separate thing, and I suggest you probably talk with the staff team about it. But there's a different type of tax that's associated with it, but it's all kind of the same. So there's a gross tax, or there's a gross pay that you have, and then there's a net pay. Your gross pay is stuff that you get before your taxes. So that's if, let's say, for example, you get, um, let's put a general salary of $50,000 a year. That $50,000 before your taxes, your retirement, any other miscellaneous things, that's going to be your gross pay. I don't actually know what that number is off the top of my head, but some number that you get. And then there's a thing called net pay. And so
Nico,
yeah,
you were frozen for a second, but talk,
Where'd
say,
I- hello,
okay, you can keep going, you're good.
I'm good. Did you
Yeah.
guys get everything, or do I need to go back?
Yeah, no, well,
I think we got it.
yeah, we're good. It was literally like 2 seconds, you were frozen.
Okay. So you have net pay, and your net pay is going to be something where you're going to have your retirement taking out. So that's like a 401k, which we'll talk about just here coming up. You'll have sometimes, as of recently, so you guys, your employers might be able to offer you this in their benefits, is I have vacation I can purchase. So I can purchase up to an extra week of vacation, and that will be taken out as a pre-tax expense. You'll also have medical, dental, vision. There's a lot of different things. Honestly, if you want to talk about benefits, talk about the guy right behind you. Obviously, he's not here anymore, but Bruno knows the stuff to a T. So he'd be able to help you a lot.
Wait, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Are you saying that net pay is once like retirement, medical, dental is like removed, what you're left with is the net pay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So that's everything you take your gross pay, you're taking a lot of expenses, which would be medical, dental, 401k, all that type of stuff. And then you get your net pay, and that's what you'll actually see on your paycheck. So if, let's say, for example, you made $2,000 a month, taxes, benefits, medical, all that type of stuff got taken out, you got $500 taken out of that, you'll be ending with $1,500. So kind of just gives you a better understanding of what your actual pay should be at the end of a paycheck.
Mhm.
So I had previously mentioned a 401k. Who knows what a 401k is? Have you guys heard of it before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you guys don't know, which I'll just kind of specify, so 401k is an employee-sponsored retirement program. This is introduced from the government, I think sometime in like the 80s when they were starting to shift away from pensions and moving more towards self-sufficient retirement plans for people. They've then changed that into something else called an IRA. Don't get confused with that. I'll talk about it later. We'll stick to 401ks right now. So what is a 401k? Generally, from an employer, you will get a certain match. So say, for example, if you contribute 3%, they're going to contribute 3%. So in that example where we had $2,000 per month, and let's say you had $100 you're contributing to your 401k, they would also contribute $100 in addition to your $100. So you've probably heard this or maybe you haven't, but people always say it's free money, that they will always give you the free money. So why is this important? It's important because you're looking at a long time horizon. So you want, we're what, early 20s, maybe middle 20s for me. And you're looking to have that growth compound. So it's a thing called compounding interest, which is a very buzzer word everybody likes to say in personal finance community. But generally it is if you let it sit long enough, your interest is going to build upon itself and build upon itself and build upon itself. And then the other thing is letting your money work for you and not you working for your money when you're trying to save and retire. So these are very important things, a part of your 401k. And the big thing that sometimes people get messed up is that they put the money into the 401k, but they never invested. I remember talking to somebody who is a financial advisor, and they told me one of their clients had said that they never invested their 401k money and they missed out on like hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of 40 years because they never put it in some sort of investment. So a lot of people don't realize that. And it's, I think, a big thing that I guess I'll tell you guys, and I want everybody to kind of know around me, is make sure you're not just putting it in there, but you're actually putting it into some sort of fund, which I will not tell you what fund you should go with. I think if you should want to do that, you should talk with a financial advisor or somebody who knows the finances behind it, or you can do the research yourself, but make sure you're actually investing it.
Nico, so how do they make that distinction? You have to ask your employer to invest it, or like you have to opt into investing it, or what's the process of doing that?
Yeah, so normally you have and I'll speak from my experience, and obviously I've helped my fiance Rachel with it. But generally, you go through a third company.
I love you.
So you go from doing, let's say, for example, where you work, which would be, let's say, for example, 3M. 3M would have a different service, so that would be a different company that would manage 401k. So in this case, it could be Fidelity, Vanguard. They're just random companies that just think of a random company. And what you'll do is you'll elect how much you want to put in, so percentage wise. If you want to increase it, so if you want to put it from, let's say, 3% to meet the match and you want to go 4%, 5% after a year, or you can change it whenever you want to. And then what you'll be able to do is you'll generally be able to choose some sort of target fund, or you can choose a mixed amount. So it could be like a bond fund, a um, high growth fund, high risk fund. You could have an international fund, a cash fund where it's like kind of low numbers, but you'll get more of a safer return on it. So you'll be able to look at all that stuff. Generally, if you need help with it, you can contact your people, your HR representatives there, and they'll be able to give you better training and coaching. They won't tell you what to do, but they'll point you to some sort of company website where they can kind of give you a better insight. So, hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I've just never heard of that before. I just assumed if you're putting money into a 401k that it was gonna be getting invested. Just, it seems strange that it would ever be just sitting there doing nothing.
Yeah, I mean, so it's dependent on how your company will structure how they handle 401ks. Some companies will automatically put it in there for you, but I think a majority of the time companies will allow you to choose which investment you want to do. So
Yeah.
for example, I put a thing called a 2065 retirement fund, which is basically an automated fund that you put the money into and they will manage all the other stuff and they basically give you these options when you're signing up for your retirement plan.
Mm.
So most of the time when you guys take your position or when you get your first job, they normally will do this in the onboarding process. And if they don't, then at least make sure you can ask questions and say, hey, where do I find this? How can I look for that? And being assertive about trying to find these things because it's very important. So, um, in conjunction with that, retirement is important because as we're living longer, we need to start planning for that type of stuff. So, general age expectancy when you were like in the 1970s, 1980s is probably like 60, 70. It's now projected that people can live up to 80 or 90. And when I was born, they projected with all the medical expenses or medical technology is going to increase, I could live up to 120. So it's important to be able to try to plan these things out. And I can go into it later, but there's a YouTube channel that I watch. So it says know your number. So know how much you want to be able to have at the end of your retirement. So if it's, for example, $2 million, $1 million, $500,000, $200,000, you want to be able to kind of budget and know how much you need in your retirement. So, any questions so far? All right. So that's kind of related to your job. So we talked about getting your 401k started, making sure you know what kind of gross and net pay is. I could go into how you're going to do tax brackets. I think that's a little too big of a scope that we don't really need to get into, but you're generally put into specific tax brackets and it's a progressive tax system. So let's say for example, I think the next tax bracket is $44,000. If you go over $44,000 and it puts you into 22% as opposed to 10%, you're not going to pay, $22,000 for all of the money. You're only going to pay the next dollar, that 22%. I'm throwing numbers out there, but I just want to let you know that there is tax brackets and there is some nuances to it. But if if you're interested in that stuff, I can go into it in the questions time. So, apart from your job, I want to then look at kind of what is your life outside of your job. So you have, obviously you're looking for a place to live. Let's say you're not taking a job in Duluth or you're not taking a job in the cities or with family. You got to look for where are you going to live, how much are you spending to live, and what are some other insurances that you're going to have to pay for. So house insurance, renting, car insurance, all these different type of things you have to look at. So, but I first want to talk about renting versus buying. So look for a place that you can live within your means. Some people will make, I'll throw a number out there, $3,000 a month, and then they spend about $2,000 on rent, which only leaves them about $1,000 for, insurances, food, and maybe some other stuff. And I know it's very difficult out there because of inflation and all this other tough stuff, but make sure that you're trying to do your best to live within your means. Um, that's a very hard thing, but that's something that I want to try and emphasize. And don't expect it to be the most glitzy glamour thing ever. So if you're expecting it to look like Boulder Ridge or Summit Ridge, it might not. If you're living in Duluth, it might be okay. If you're living in the cities, it's really tough. It's really tough to get a how do I say, like a glitzy glammy spot, if that makes sense. Um, Another misconception is people always say renting is throwing away money. I want to disprove this myth by saying when you're renting, you don't have to worry about a dishwasher being broken or a furnace going out or a foundation being cracked or walls coming down or any of that type of stuff. That's on the risk of your landlord. So your landlord will be handling that. And I'm sure Rachel will be able to tell you there's a lot of fees that go into buying a house.
Yep.
Am I right, Rachel?
Yep, when you buy a house, you also throw a lot of money away that you'll never see again.
That's the other thing is generally when you want to buy a house, you want to be able to look for a time horizon of 5 to 7 years is what generally people kind of suggest if you want to have a good amount. And generally to buy a house, you need this thing, which is again is another buzzword. People like to say capital. So you need a capital investment to deal with this. Boils down to you need cash. You need some sort of money dollar amount that you can put for a down payment on a house. And generally people always suggest to put 20% down. There's a thing that I didn't realize when I first came out of college and I've been looking at more is when you buy your first house, you don't have to put 20% down. There's certain programs you can do, a first time home buyers program, which allows you to buy a house at a lower percentage. So that can be anywhere from 0 to 3.5 to 5% in some states and in Minnesota. And you have to, I think, not buy a house for, not have owned a piece of real estate or something like that in the past 3 years. So regardless, there's certain programs you guys can take advantage of that you're able to actually purchase a house later on in your life. But again, I want to say renting is not throwing away your money. You are not burning it. There are pros and cons to renting and very many pros and cons to buying a house. The house takes upkeep. The house takes, you are essentially paying for all of the stuff that goes wrong. As you're renting, you're just kind of like, wave your hands, say, hey, can you fix this? So, yeah, that's kind of it on home buying. Has anybody got any questions? We can go into it later, but I just want to capture anything right now before we move on.
What was the time horizon that you said? What is that?
Generally 5 to 7 years. So when you buy a house, okay, so when you buy a house, if you want to buy a house, you generally want to live in a house for 5 to 7 years before you would move on to something else.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
Or else it's not gonna be worth it because of the
All the
upfront
fees.
costs.
Oh, okay,
Mhm.
gotcha.
So for example,
She
You
can't
what?
live in a place for more than like 6 years. And we lived in Delano for 7, and that was like the longest she's probably lived in a place
Yeah.
since she was a
So-
kid.
so those are the type of things that you kind of have to weigh if you are going to be buying or renting. So
Mhm.
if you're renting, it makes sense to rent if you're not moving around or if you're moving around a lot. If you kind of don't know your job situation, you're kind of going to say, hey, I like Duluth for a year, but I want to go live in Sacramento for 2 or 3 years of my life and I'll rent there or I'll go rent in Denver, other different places. But if you're planning on, you know, let's say you're getting married, you have a kid on the way, you're looking to stay somewhere for 5 to 7 years because you really like this job and you got a lot of good things. That's when you generally want to start to think about, hey, maybe a house could be there, But if I do want to buy a house, understanding that it's going to take a lot of money to put into it, but if you stay in it longer term, that it's going to be worth it in the end, or when you eventually want to sell, but you have
We
to
used
stay
to
there for
move
5
like
to 7.
every year. So we used to move like every year, like she can't sit still.
Yeah. So,
Just funny.
yeah, just want to be able to tell you guys that stuff because again, nobody's told me any of this stuff.
Mhm.
It's a rough, it's a cold world out there. A lot of stuff you got to look at yourself. So I want to be able to help you guys out from the little that I know.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I appreciate
So,
it.
the next thing is kind of what I mentioned earlier, but spend less than you make. Not saying you can't have fun, but you need to be able to still pay for the important things in your life. Like I mentioned, you can't sacrifice a living situation. You can't sacrifice having health insurance if you're not on your parents. If you're on your parents, then I'd say you have a little bit more leeway. But if you are living by yourself and you aren't with your parents' insurance and you aren't under your parents, you can't sacrifice health insurance or dental. Um, or for example, if you need to drive to work, it's going to be really hard to be able to drive to work if you got to make sure you pay for your car insurance as well. So um, you can still have fun, but you don't need to buy a fancy car as soon as you get out. I think that's kind of the myth that people think is now that I have big boy money or big girl money that I can go and just blow it on something. Um, that's like a facade that the world likes to show you, when in reality, I drove a piece of crap car for a while and I loved it, and I have this newer car and there's still problems with it. But uh, I didn't get the newest, brightest thing. I got a car with 108,000 miles on it. That was 2016. So like I didn't go to a dealership and just say, "Hey, give me the brightest, newest thing." It's like I live within my means and I don't need the flashiest thing ever.
Mhm.
Um, in conjunction with that, budget to see what you need versus what you want. So additional, don't overspend and stuff, but make sure you have a budget. In the personal finance community, which I say that is kind of like people who really care about it, but also what financial advisors kind of give is like a general understanding, is you want to have 50-30-20 rule. So 50% of your money that you make in per month, that's what you want on your needs. So that's, car insurance, rent, food, a general amount. So obviously, you're talking about food. Some months could be higher, some months could be lower, but a general average of what you think you're going to spend per month. You got 30% towards wants. So that could be going out with friends, maybe going out to restaurants with people, doing a shopping if you like it. I personally, in my own budget, I set up money to go golf. So I can't golf during the whole year, but I choose to set aside some money so that I can golf during the summer and be able to spend a little time with some friends and uh, try to improve my game, even though it never really works. But um, and then 20% of your savings. So trying to hit a savings goal of 20%. And again, these are not concrete numbers. So there's a lot of freedom that you can have in your budget, but it's a general guideline for people to be able to follow. And it gives somebody maybe a fighting chance of understanding how they can better manage their money by themselves. So you can set up your own way of tracking your expenses in your budget. So with that, there's this thing called a $0 budget, or there's another way called an envelope method. So your $0 budget is, um, let's say, for example, everything that comes in on this hand over here is all the money you get from your net pay. And then all the money after between my hands is expenses, 50%, 30%, 20%, all that type of stuff I just talked about. At the end here, you want to have zero. So let's say food is this chunk, housing is this chunk, car expense, all this other stuff. And you want to be able to get to net zero. So that looks like, hey, if you have any money left over, it's all going into savings. You know where every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out, and it should be the exact same. And then there's the envelope method, which they say the envelope method, but in reality, it could be different accounts type method. So you could just put different money in different accounts that you want. So let's say, for example, you want to, how do I say this? Let's say you're trying to save for a house. Let's say you're always putting in $20-$30 a month, or some sort of number that you're putting in there. Let's say you have your food budget, you have your buckets that you're trying to work into. and you have a certain amount of money that's dedicated to each of those buckets. If you generally want to stay underneath the bucket and try to be, um, uh, it's kind of hard because we don't really use envelopes for this stuff, but you can open different accounts to be able to have different tracking for each of those things. I personally don't do it that way. I personally find the $0 budget method to kind of be everything. I know everything coming in. I know everything until when I get to $0 at the beginning of the or at the end of the month. I don't know exactly how much it is. So example could that be, let's say you make $4,000 a month. $500 of that is um let's say $600 of that is rent. Food is $300. Um what else do we have to pay for? Insurance is $200, and you get all the way to the end. And let's say you have an extra $200 left, right? And you say all that $200 that I have left at this little chunk right here, it's all getting put to savings. And I know exactly which area that's going into, which is savings, which means I know where all my money is, and I'm at my $0. So I know it's a little confusing. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Do you have rainy day money or is that what you dip in for your savings? Like say something goes wrong with your car or something?
Yeah, so I was gonna get into that, but we can go ahead now. So it's a I generally call that an emergency fund. So for personal finance, they suggest about 3 to 6 months for a personal emergency fund. So let's say you make $4,000 of your net pay, you generally want to have about $10,000 to $12,000 saved up for your emergency fund to make sure that if your car breaks down, I can pay for it. If your um, boiler goes out in your house, I can pay for that. Now, as you increase in your life and make sure that you um, are getting a good job, that you're looking for that new opportunities, all that type of stuff, right? That you can look for at your job to increase your pay, to make sure that in conjunction with that, you still increase the amount of emergency savings you have. So let's say, for example, you got kids, such as Rachel. You want to have I think, a beefier savings than if you're single, right? Or if you're owning a home, you want to have a bigger emergency fund than when you're renting, because obviously you have to pay for all that type of stuff when you do have a house problem. So it's
Unfortunately,
what?
oh, you're back. You cut out again, but just
Oh.
for a few seconds.
Okay. But yeah, it's making sure that you kind of move through the course of your life and being able to say, hey, if I have a house, I need to have a little bit more in case a boiler goes out, or if a sink goes out, or a plumber needs, that type of stuff. Um, does that answer your question, Jacinda?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Um, so with the budget, you can use a budgeting app. So I used to use an app called Mint. Mint does not exist anymore. So don't write that down. I don't know any budgeting apps because what I do is I personally look at my bank statements, different card statements, and different accounts that I have, and I'll put those together in a spreadsheet. So I'll do all the stuff manually. You can get a budgeting app. I remember Kristen, when she was on the panel, she made a reference to one, but I don't remember what it is. I can ask her and then send it to Rachel, and she can send it to you guys. But that'll automatically track. If you put all of your accounts in one place, it'll automatically track everything you spend, everything you can set a budget in there and all that type of stuff. And I think the big pointer after we get through all this budget stuff is to make sure to know that this is not a law. So the budget is not some I guess thing cracking a whip on you. It's not, if you go over, you're like, my life is over. I've failed so hard. This is not a law that you guys have to obey. In the same way with Christians, we're not under the law anymore. We're under the law of grace. Same thing with budgeting. We got to remember that there's going to be tougher months. There's going to be differences that we're going to have to meet every single month. Some months were low, some months were high, but it's not the law. The best way to think of it is more of a coach. So let's say you set it up in your life. You set up, I need $20 a month for coffee, $30 a month for fast food, and $100 a month plus for groceries, or some whatever number you plug into yourself for your budget. And it's a coach that's trying to help keep you on track towards that goal, which is saving money for a house, saving money for a car, saving money for, insert for your situation. It's not screaming at you. It's not hitting you over the head for spending too much. It's showing you where you can either make improvements in your spending, or you can increase your saving with certain areas. Um, I I guess I'll say from my personal experience, when I first got out of college and I was very into this whole personal finance stuff that was going on, I treated the budget as if it was law. So if I went over, I would say, you have done a poor job. This is not good. You need to reassess everything going on. And it was a pretty harmful thing for me. And even with Rachel, when I talked with her, it was a harmful thing for her too, because then I would put that on her. And something that I've learned from counseling, and something that I've also learned from just being free from the Mint app, or even just checking all the time, is that we shouldn't be driven by this stuff. It should just, again, it should be a part of our life, not the main focus of our life.
Nico, the app that Kristen had recommended is called YNAB.
There you go.
You need a budget.
Did you write it down?
No, I just Googled it and that's the one that sounds familiar to me.
Yeah.
I remember,
pretty-
yeah.
She
You-
swore by that app. She loved it.
So it does say though, that this is a budgeting program based on the envelope system.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, interesting. I don't know if that matters to people, but I'm sure there's other ones that are based on the $0 as well.
Yeah. And again, the important thing is to know is, when I was kind of talking with everybody about personal finance, and there was a guy who's in my groomsmen party, and his name's Cam, and he's really into finances too. And he always told me he's like, personal finance is so subjective to each person. I mean, like, look at the differences between us, even in how we are together as the body of Christ. But on top of that, imagine how different we are with where we like spending our money. What do we like to do for fun? Like, if somebody's like, "Hey, I want to go hike," I'm like, that sounds terrible to me, dude. I'd love to go spend money on video games as opposed to hiking, right? So it's having to work with and understand what you like to do and what are your goals, and how you can best manage those things. And sometimes it's important to have a financial advisor. So that's that physical type of coach who's being able, like, hey, maybe we should check our spending this month, or maybe we should, hey, are you adding in that 20% for I don't know, retirement or something like that. They'll be able to actually physically coach you through stuff. And they also provide you more than just saying, hey, let's make a budget and that's it. They can help you with doing your taxes and finding people for that with accountants that they know. So they're a good resource for you if you want to look for that. This is the next big thing, which I'm sure a lot of people are maybe a little squeamish on. I'll say the word: credit cards. Good. Nobody scream. Good. Credit cards are good, but only for the right people.
Yeah, sure.
If you want to get a credit card, there are some things that you should do, which I'll get into. But also, if you don't want a credit card, that is also okay. You don't need credit cards. You don't need credit cards to pay for stuff. And in fact, I'd say it's actually easier to stick to a budget when you look at your, let's say your checking account, and you're looking at it, you're like, dang, I got $1,000. Do I really want to spend $800 on a brand new gaming PC? You're like, I can't use somebody else's money to buy it. I got to use my own money. So it's a better way of accountability. But credit cards have their advantages, but only for the right people. So if you want to do a credit card, which I will not emphasize anybody to take advantage of a credit card if they do not want to. I personally love credit cards, and I think they're very advantageous to people if you know how to use them. If you want to use them, you need to make sure that you pay them off every month. So you cannot hold a balance. So if you are going to pay for one, let's say, for example, you put $1,000 on shopping for clothes throughout the entire month, and you're like, I only got $500 in my account right now. I'll just pay the $500 and then I'll just let interest accrue on the next 500. Absolutely not. Do not do that. That is a very dangerous slope to get down, and it's something that is very detrimental to people's lives. Is credit card debt. The best way to do it is to treat it as if a debit card. So, for example, if you're, let's say you want to buy those $1,000 of clothes. Again, I'm going ludicrous examples here, but I just want to make sure you guys see it. $1,000 in clothes. Make sure that you have that extra amount in your budget for those extra wants that you have. So, for example, if you want to buy $1,000 of clothes, make sure that fits into your 50, 30, 20 budget as best as it can so that you can actually afford those clothes. And at the end of the month, you have that money to pay off that credit card. And then if you are going to use a credit card, make sure you do your research on if this is a right card for you. So there's credit card annual fees that can get all the way up to $700 a year, right? And they provide you all these crazy benefits. You can get $300 in travel credits, and you can use a Peloton membership and all stuff. But if you're going to look at your life and you're going to say, I don't even do those things, there's no point in you getting that credit card.
Yeah.
So if you want to get one, you could say, hey, I'll use a 0 annual fee card because it gets me 2% cash back on groceries or something like that. And you actually go to the grocery store. Duh. So you can use your credit card for that type of stuff. But getting into higher and higher amounts, when you don't use it, you're just losing money on those. So that's the thing where credit card companies are taking advantage of, people like you and me, when in reality we should be taking advantage of the system. Now, when I say taking advantage of, it sounds kind of like a bad connotation, but being able to use the resource of a credit card and be able to benefit from those different resources. So, for example, you're paying money on it, you might get 2% cash back. And then let's say, for example, after 5, 10 years, you have enough cash back or something like that, and you can afford a trip to somewhere or something like that. So different types of things that you can that you're able to use from credit cards, but again, only if you do it the right way. And sometimes you're not a credit card person. That is also okay. You don't have to have a credit card. I know a lot of people that don't even touch credit cards, and they say, I live my life fine. It's simple. It's easy. There's no point in doing it. And other people, there's a guy at my work who just told me today, he said, me and my wife are closing down our 30th credit card and opening up another one so we can get the points. So there's different people. You can play those type of credit card games, but know that you're going to have to be very diligent in how you do it and very meticulous in how you're keeping track of everything.
Can I
So
share one thing about that, Nico?
Yeah.
When you're talking about credit cards, you have to think about also your credit score, because credit cards impact your credit score. And one of the bigger factors that plays into your credit score is your average length of credit. So how long you've had your accounts open. So if you are doing that jumping around between credit cards and you're constantly closing cards, then you don't have a line of credit that's stayed open long enough to increase your score. So if you are gonna bop around and close things, it's good to keep at least 1 or 2 open that are your longer standing ones. So for me, I have credit cards that I use more often that are newer ones that give me higher cash back. But my oldest credit card is my Discover card, and I'm not going to close it. I don't use it very often, but if I close it, then my average length of credit goes way down, because I've had that one since the beginning of college. So it's you want to keep some length of credit open to help your credit score.
Yeah. And
I've
I
had
think
2 years and I have a really good credit score. But I have a bank credit card, so there's no interest on it, which is really nice. But I still pay it off. It's a little hard when I work 15 hours a week or so, but I make sure that I see in the future, I'm okay, I know I'm gonna make more that month, I can pay the rest off, or something like that. Or when I got my tax refund back, I was I know that will pay off those extra purchases I had to make with groceries and stuff. So
And yeah, so for example, credit score is nothing but just shows how good of a lender, or not a lender, a payer back you are. So credit works, you borrow somebody else's money, they then judge you on how well you're able to pay that back. So there's different categories. So there's length of credit, credit utilization, which is just, if let's say, for example, you have a $10,000 credit limit and you use 8,000 of it, they're going to knock you on that because you're using a lot of the credit that you're borrowing from somebody else. Generally assume that you want to keep it below 30%. But what I say, keep it at 0. Just pay everything off. You don't want to hold on to anything because that's where you start to get to slippery slopes. Or hey, I forgot 1 month. I know that because I had a Target card. I think I missed it by like 1 day. So I didn't miss a payment, but they were going to start charging interest on it if I didn't pay that day. And I called them right away and said, hey, I'll get it sorted. Sorry about that. Sort it out.
Can I
There's
ask a quick-
also, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I want you guys to talk. It's totally fine.
I was just gonna ask, so as far as like using up that credit limit, so for example, like if you have your credit limit is like 2,000, for example, and you spend 1,000, so that's 50% of that credit limit. If usually like statements like that post on your credit card within like, I don't know, like 3 to 7 days, if you paid that off like right as soon as it's posted before like the month is up, does that would that impact your credit score because you like paid it off before like interest are accruing, or is it like at that like month time frame is when they're like, hey, you've used too much of your credit, or like is there something like that, or just in general if you're like over a certain percentage they're like you've used too much?
Yeah, so I guess I can kind of go into how credit cards are like it's a strange credit card game, but just generally how like credit card and credit card score kind of function. So you have your, let's say for example, start of the month is June 1st, right? And you have your credit statement that opens June 1st. Your credit statement will show you everything you bought within June 1st until the end. Let's say, for example, June 30th is when it's done. Your credit card company will have that statement close date, but then they'll also have that posted date of when you need to start paying or when they'll start charging interest, right? Like let's say 2 days after or 3 days after. But they'll look and they'll update your credit score. So that's when they look at like, hey, you've used utilization. So it's not like every single day they're checking, oh, she's at 50%. Oh, she's at 20%. Oh, she's back to 0. We're good now. They kind of do it in a monthly cycle. So once your credit card statement closes, so that's you have all your purchases from that month, it's closed. The next cycle is starting. I'm going to start tracking stuff there. That's what the credit card company is looking at. 2 or 3 days afterwards, that's when you're going to see an update to your credit score and say, hey, you did 30% utilization, 20% utilization, something like that. And then if you were to not pay your credit card off in full, that's when interest would start to accrue, like those crazy interest rates that people have always talked about.
So
Does
would
that
you
kind of answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It is helpful, like if you can pay it off like more than just at the end of the month, like that will lower your utilization.
Hmm.
Like if you spent $1,000, but then you pay it off right away, your utilization will go back down to 0.
Mhm.
So it's like they kind of average it out throughout the month.
Okay.
So would you recommend paying it off like kind of as soon as you can, like right away? Or would you recommend paying it off like at the end of the month?
So this is the hard thing about personal finance. This is up to you. I
Okay.
personally will, as soon as I buy something, 2 or 3 days later, will just open up my phone, see what I have left, pay, and just do everything.
Okay.
Some people, what they do is they have bi-monthly dates that they do. So let's say the first of the month and the 15th of the month, they know to always pay their credit cards, or at the very end of the month, they pay their credit cards. And some people just put auto pay. Auto pay is good, but as a caveat, it is dangerous if you are running very low in your checking account or wherever you're pulling money from, and you're just again spending a lot more than what you think you have. That's where it becomes dangerous. If, like, say, for example, you have $2,000 in your account and you have a $1,800 credit bill, it's automatically going to pull $1,800 out, and you're going to be like, "Oh wait, I defaulted on something," and
Yeah,
that's where it gets to
I
be
hate auto
dangerous.
pay. I'd rather.
It's helpful to have auto pay on, I think, because it covers your base if you were to forget. But I
It
think
does.
it's good to go in yourself and pay more frequently than just that.
I like the discipline of like knowing where my money's going, like
Yeah.
going in and making sure like I don't know, like I like having that option to be like, okay, I'm gonna put this towards it and like watching it happen. I don't
Yeah,
Mhm.
and then you don't have the factor of like, it's the end of the month and you're like, oh frick, my like credit card has $1,500 on it. If you're
Mhm.
checking it weekly or even every other
Yeah.
week, you can see what you have on there so that you're like more
I think
aware
I
of what
check
you're
it weekly.
spending. Yeah.
I think something like that.
So yeah, again, that's why I say it's kind of personally up to you and how you want to manage it. I'm kind of analytical with it, and I'm very much like every 2 or 3 days, I open up the app, press pay, press pay, press pay. And some people are like, you check your credit card every 2 or 3 days? I'm like, yeah. I mean, I like to know and keep track of all that stuff. Um, and Rachel, my fiance, what she does is she pays it off at the 2 days before the end of the month and just lets everything build up to that point, pays it off right before the statement, 2 or 3 days before the statement ends, and then she moves on with her life. My dad, fully auto pay, doesn't even look at it half the time. He just auto pays. So it's kind of dependent on how you want to do it and how you want to kind of manage your financial situation. So I don't want to give too much advice on that type of stuff because it's very dependent on how you want to do it. Okay, so moving away from credit cards, I want to talk about different money accounts you guys can have. So you can have there's this thing called a high yield savings account. So when we talked about the um emergency fund, generally you want to keep it in a thing that's liquid. So when I say liquid, that means something you can easily move money around from different accounts. Whereas if it's tied up, it's an asset. There's assets, but then there's also things that are illiquid. Um, you'll have things like, for example, if you're to put money in stocks, it's really hard to sell a stock right away, and then you have to pay capital gains tax on it, and then you can finally use that money. Whereas if you keep it in your checking, your savings, your high yield savings account, you then can move your money around between different accounts if you want. Um, it's a higher interest rate on your money. So currently, right now, we're in a high interest rate environment, and that will mean you'll probably get around 4 to 5%, depending on which company you go with, um, which is way higher than a traditional account. So we're talking 4 to 5% for a high yield savings. Generally, in like a standard savings account, it's like 0.2 or some crappy number. Not a lot. Um, yep, keep your emergency fund in your savings account. And then personally what I like to do, so we talked about how we're doing budgeting of we're doing the $0 method, we're doing the envelope method, and in conjunction with that, I personally use my checking account as like the funnel for all of the other things that I do. So that could be I get my paycheck into my checking account, I get my credit cards pulled out of my checking account. I use my checking account to put in money into my high yield savings account. I use my checking account to transfer money into a investing account. So I use that as like the central location, and then I can go and move that into other accounts that I'd use. I have 3 more things that I know we're kind of getting close, but I'll try to scoot through this. Um, Obviously, we're in a very high social media environment, right? So many people live extravagantly, but most of the time that's not the reality. That is like people driving Lambo cars and spending stuff on Gucci shoes, all that type of stuff. That's don't listen to that crap. It's lies of the world. Most of those time, we've seen those people who are using a lot of credit and they're very much in debt and they don't have a lot of money. They used to like to flex it, but they're not actually there. They're really like smart people with their money are like, you guys ever seen Bill Gates, Elon Musk, all these type of guys? They walk around with like hoodies, like super basic, like they don't need this fancy stuff. You can have those wants, but most of the time they kind of live a very average life. I remember there was a story of a guy who I think he was like a high executive at a company one time, and one of the guys was like, "Hey, you're in like you're traveling?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm traveling for business, all that type of stuff." So he had like a nice seat on a plane, and he's like, "You have an iPhone 5?" It was like 2018 when there was like an iPhone 10 or something like that. He's like, "Yeah, I don't need much. I just use my phone for this, that, and this, and I don't need to spend money on it." Those are the type of things of like you don't need the newest phone, you don't need the fanciest things that you think you need because people are telling you that stuff. Um, that's one of the lies that I think a lot of people get sucked into. Um, Next thing is check for sound financial advice. So I'll tell you, uh, when I was earlier on in college, there was a stock called GameStop. And if you guys have heard of it, it's the GameStop stock that went to like, I don't know, I think like 20 or 30 times the amount of stock price in like a single day or something like that. And I talked with one of my guys that I knew, and he's like, "Yeah, I made like $10,000 in a day." And I was like, "What? That's crazy." So then I started buying into it. And then everybody that I was hanging out with, they started telling me to buy into it. And lo and behold, I lost like 50% of the money that I put in. So like gone like that. So, check that the people are giving you stuff is actually good sound advice, and that you kind of weigh it against your own conscience, and you make sure that it's not some mumbo jumbo that people are sending to you. Um, as I kind of earlier mentioned, some of the trusted sources that I have, and I'll kind of give people a second to write down. So, Investopedia is a good website where they talk a lot about personal finance. They understanding what is a high yield savings account, how do you calculate your taxes, what are tax brackets, what do different business terms mean. So Investopedia is good. NerdWallet is another very similar one. NerdWallet will have um that one generally curtails more towards credit cards. What is a good credit card? What could you use? How can it benefit you? And then if you want something more for watching purposes, the Money Guy show is these guys I swear by. They're so good. Um, I think they are Christian based, but they don't actually explicitly say that, but they hold a lot of Christian values where I think they've talked about one time they're like, oh yeah, make sure you're saving extra money to give to others, which I'll get into in a little bit, but they have a really good show that they talk about, and I think a couple of their newest videos is they have what are your certain age groups, how should you be using your money in different ways, and those type of things. Um, oh, I just realized I missed one. This I'm going to go back to this because it's very important. Paying your student loans off, or paying loans in general. Student debt, credit card debt, any other type of debt that you hold in your life. The important thing is to pay off the highest interest rate first with any additional income.
We were talking about that earlier.
So that again is kind of dependent on how you want it. So there's I think there's I think it's called the avalanche method, or there's two different types of methods that you have.
Snowball. I know
Snowball.
that term. Snowball method, yeah.
So there's snowball, and what's the other one?
Oh, I don't know, I just know the snowball one.
So there's one where it's snowball is you pay off the easiest one first, and then you can move on to the next biggest one, next biggest one, next biggest one, and then it's called found income is what I was told. But you're just getting rid of, or sorry, not the highest interest rate first, and then
Yeah.
you're slowly bringing it down to be able to get to there. And then there's another one which I think I've heard is you just attack all of it together, or you attack your highest income, highest debt first. So that's, say for example, you say you have a debt of 5,000, 10,000, and 20,000. You want, even though the 20,000 has a low debt, you just attack the highest debt first, and you get rid of that highest debt, and then you work on the next one, and the next one, next one. So I've heard do different types of things. I generally think just go with the highest interest rate first. Make sure you attack that one first with any additional income, but still pay for the lower interest rate ones. A lot of people get messed up where they say, "Hey, I'll just pay the biggest one and that's it." You still will have a payment you'll have to do. Let's say, for example, you take multiple student loans out per the year or throughout your entire years at college. You can pay the highest interest rate one first, but you still need to make the minimum monthly payment for the lower ones as well, or else they'll still ask for a payment or something like that. So don't neglect the smaller ones, but make sure that any additional income that you have after you've paid for all the stuff, that you then pay for your highest one.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about, obviously like paying off my student loans. I won't start having monthly payments until like the end of 25, like the year 25. So I've been like, I know like attack those like highest interest rates first. Would you suggest like then paying off maybe the interest off of this other, like the other ones, if there's not that minimum monthly payment? Or just like go all in for like the highest ones?
I would recommend that you look for attacking any student loans.
Yeah,
I don't want to tell you which ones to do because I technically I can't give you that advice.
okay, yeah.
Like-
Yeah, if you think, probably, I'm guessing paying off the interest is like the kind of the minimum, I guess. but until they have like that set number you have to pay each month. I know.
So your minimum will account majority of the time if you haven't paid for anything, your minimum will generally just be you paying interest off the principal. You don't
Okay.
really start paying your principal off until like 30 or 40% of the way into your loan.
Okay.
So it takes a longer time to get start eating away at the actual principal of your interest or principal of your debt as opposed to the interest that's accruing on your
Yeah.
debt.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, I would recommend you if you have any extra, just pay off whatever you can.
Okay.
As we talked about earlier, for your investing and for your retirement 401k, compound can work for you. This can also work against you. So if you're taking up credit card debt or something like that, that's what's going to send you in the other direction of being stuck and having a lot of other problems um, with debt. And generally, try to stay out of debt as best you can. Debt is a very powerful tool, but again, as credit cards we talked about, it's dependent on who is using it and how you use it. So I'll just leave it at that. The last thing I want to talk about, which I think to me is very important, is giving to God. So making sure that you're, even though the Lord is blessing you with this ability to work and all this money that He's being able to give you, He still owns all of it in the end. It's always His money. It's never ours. He just lets us borrow it. Now, there's an elder from my church, and I met with him, and I think I had talked about this at the panel, but I'll just talk again with you guys. Is he's a director of engineering. I don't know how much money he makes, but I think he makes a really good amount. And he talked about, he's like, well, none of this is mine anyways. God's given me the blessing to it, so I need to be able to pay it back. So he says, yep, I steward all my money to the church. And he said with additional income, he made a scholarship for people with mental disabilities such as autism, um, Down syndrome, any of these um, mental disabilities that people have, and try to get them to go to college at a local university he has. And he's like, it's always been God's money, and I want to be able to give back to the people um, that God has put on my heart. So these type of things where God says, "Hey, pay me 10%," blah blah blah. Like it shouldn't be a number; it should be a heart. I want you to have like a heart position behind it. Um, I've personally felt like the more I give back to God, the more He blesses me in more ways than just money. And I don't think He's even like, for example, if I were to put money into Him and be like, "Hey, I'll expect a blah 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 percent return," like He blesses you in many different ways. So, um, if you're giving to, for example, staff team, they are doing more in leaps and bounds than what I would ever be able to do because they're boots on the ground, actually working and spreading the gospel. Now, we should all be accountable for that and being able to be the light, but they're doing more and more things that I would never be able to do if we never had the ability to give to others. And I think generally what I've always heard is a tithe, so 10% of your income. But again, I would challenge you that 10% is 10% of 100. So that means you have still 90% left of your money that you have. And if you give a little extra, God, I think, wants to see our hearts be more cheerful towards Him. And it even says God loves a cheerful giver in the Bible. So He wants to see His people love one another and bless churches, bless missionaries, and be able to send them out to spread the gospel that He's intending to have the world see and hear. And yeah, give unto God what is already His, and He will bless you. I remember when I talked with the elder one time, he told me, he's like, God's just allowing you to be the manager of His money. You know, we have financial advisors and money managers and stuff like that, and God's trusting you. You say, hey, I got this really cool thing and this really powerful thing, and I'm going to trust you with it. Make sure you're going to make the right decision. So it's an interesting perspective, and it really took to heart to me. And I was saying that I need to treat God's money with respect and know that I can bless others around. So I guess we'll kind of briefly go over this. Additional information. I briefly talked about an IRA. An IRA was created in like the early 90s. It's called an individual retirement account. So apart from you saving from your employer, this is where you can add extra money into it. Um, you don't have to do one. I'd recommend you start doing one. But if you need more information, I would use those trusted sources. So like Investopedia, NerdWallet, Money Guy Show, they're going to talk about that stuff a lot. Another thing you've probably heard of, maybe you haven't, is called an HSA. So this is called a healthcare savings account or a flexible savings account. This is where when I talked about that pre-tax income, so you have your gross and you have your net, that in between region, this would pull out from your gross pay into your HSA. And your HSA will help reduce your taxes, right? Because you're lowering your taxable income from your gross pay to your net pay. Any money you put in there will grow tax free. And then any money you pull out, you don't have to pay any gains on it. So you can use that for you can sometimes I've seen you can use it for shoes, so like walking shoes, specifically walking shoes. You can use it for feminine hygiene products. You can use it for different type of ibuprofen and pills that you need to take. So if you need to take vitamins, you can use HSA money on that. Most of the time,
I'm pretty sure contacts also you can.
yep.
My
So any type
my
of
mom tells me to use hers.
yeah, any type of like medical product that you need, you generally can use it. Which a lot of people always think like, feminine hygiene products. It's like, oh, I can't spend any money on that. It's a HSA or it's FSA. I can't spend money on that. But like, you're actually legally able to do that, and you're able to take that money and spend it on whatever is needed, um, or context like you mentioned. I was surprised when I saw walking shoes the other day, but things are starting to change. So good thing.
Yeah, walking.
Yeah, I think that's kind of all I have written down. Um, we can kind of just I'll take questions if anybody has them, or just random questions that you have, or if you want me to go more in depth with something, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Tracy had to leave, but she texted me a question that she wanted to ask you.
Okay.
She was talking about how we, talked about different kind of, if you do, it's kind of like the envelope method, I guess, if you do different accounts for different like budget areas. She was saying like, she said, is it bad to open multiple accounts? Like to have different budgets coming out of different accounts, would that negatively affect your credit score?
I don't happen to know if that affects your credit score. What I will say is when I look at my credit score and I look at credit scores in general, um, number of accounts is affected, but that's for debts that you're taking. So if you were to actually borrow money for that, that's what would affect your credit score. But if you're opening accounts, like say, for example, you have a Wells Fargo account and you're just opening up different accounts within your Wells Fargo checking account, that won't affect your credit score.
Okay. I think the one thing, like, cause I've thought about that too, I'm like, it's hard to keep your money organized if you don't have different accounts, like if you have just one account, it's hard to say what the different money is for. But also like, I try to keep as much money as I can in my like high yield savings, like you're saying. So it's like, I feel like I don't wanna pull money into all these like dinky little savings accounts where they're not gonna be growing at all, So it's like, it's almost better to keep more money in one like bigger account, but then you have to like either write it down somewhere or just mentally know like how you're splitting that up into different categories.
And yeah, so like I said, that's why it's very personally dependent.
Yeah.
I personally think it's very chaotic to have a bunch of different accounts and different
Yeah.
envelopes, and you get lost, and it
Like
freaks me out.
For what? Hold up.
I personally use the spreadsheet, and what I'll do is I will make sure that I'm spending enough, that I have enough coming in, and that I don't overspend too much. And then what I do is then I say, okay, if I have enough money for this, I can do that. Now, granted, I'm not saving up for a house as of right now, but if I were to probably save up for a house, I think I'd still probably leave it in the high yield savings account, but just build a bigger emergency fund to be able to say, if I have $20,000, $30,000 for a down payment on a house, then it's I need an emergency fund on top of that of $10,000, then I need to save up $30,000 or $40,000 in a high yield savings account.
Yeah.
So those type of things. So I agree with you, Rachel. I would do the exact same thing. But I want to tell you guys that you can open up different accounts, but it will not negatively affect your credit score.
I was curious, I don't really know a whole lot about this, and probably because I'm the first to go to college in like my family, but I've been told about subsidized and unsubsidized loans, which one of them accumulates interest and the other doesn't. But assuming that it does accumulate interest, even though they advertise it as not, is that true, or how do those work?
You have government subsidized loans are loans that they give to you and they allow, yes, they allow you to not accrue interest on them. So when I had to pay my loan, I think they don't accrue interest after you're done.
Like 6 months, I think, is what I was told.
Yeah. So I think I remember because I had to take out
That's
a subsidized loan. It was the Ford grant, and it was like $4,000, and then it went up to like 4,400 or something like that. But then it didn't accrue interest afterwards. Um, and unsubsidized loans will continue to accrue interest afterwards.
Okay.
I think I don't have as much knowledge for unsubsidized versus subsidized loans for student loans as much, but I would
Sure.
say if you research on Investopedia and NerdWallet, because I've done this before, I looked at it. I don't have the answer top of my head for it. Look at those things, and they'll be able to kind of give you a better understanding. And I think UMD has, I think they have a resource where they'll talk about finances with students before you guys graduate too. Actually, I know they have one. They should have one.
Yeah, there's some emails for it too.
Yeah, yeah,
Sure.
we had to like fill out something, otherwise there was like a hold on your, like getting your diploma.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, I already know all this information because I've looked at my loans.
Yeah, there's like a FAFSA end of
Yeah,
graduation training that everybody has to go through to understand it.
I have just like kind of a random question. Do you watch Financial Audit with Caleb Hammer?
I do love that show.
I like just found it. I started watching it like maybe a month ago, and it's taught me so much about finances. Like,
Hmm.
surprised how much and then I was like, wait, I want to like think about my finances. How can I budget? And I'm like, who am I? This was not me like a month ago.
So the show she's talking about is a guy who welcomes guests into his studio, and they'll present him all of the questions that he has. So, hey, how much money do you make? Where's your money account? What are your debts? All this type of stuff. So he goes through it similar to a financial advisor, but he's not a financial advisor. But he kind of just goes through and helps people understand that there's an importance to behavior in your finance, which I think a lot of people just say, hey, it's just a number on a screen or it's a number on a this, but there's a lot of behavior behind it. So whether that be, I like going out to eat a lot, and then you're spending a lot of money at fast food, there's a certain behavior behind that of, hey, maybe we should eat at home, or we should, maybe we don't need to take, you know, you go to Costco and spend $400 every time you go there. It's like, do I really need 20 different chicken quesadillas? You could make those things yourself, like you don't really need that.
Yeah, and I love
So,
'cause he'll make the budget, but he also is like, this is what you need to survive. Like, and then he'll be like, but if you want more to like have those savings and stuff, you need to be making more. But like, this is like the minimum you need to survive without going over debt, like into more debt. A lot of these people have issues with credit cards. I hear him all the time. He's like, you are not a credit card person.
Yeah.
which is why I want to tell you guys you don't
Yeah.
need a credit card. It is
I think
not necessary or a necessity in your life.
The one that like just came out, he made her, or he like had her cut one of her credit cards on the
Yeah.
show because he's like, It's so bad." Like he's like, the only way to stop the temptation is just to get rid of it. Just
Yep.
cut it. Like, it can be intense sometimes, but I like him. I relate a lot to him, so I like his personality, so I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just curious if you watch him.
Oh, I love that dude.
Mhm.
Can you kind of speak to, because like college, a lot of us were living with roommates, so our rent is like what we could afford with the less hours that we're working. How did going from living with roommates, splitting the cost of everything, to now having the cost kind of be all on you?
So I had the fortunate or unfortunate opportunity to live with my parents.
Oh, okay.
So I have very different roommates. Um, but I've talked to my sister about this because so she lives by herself, and I suggested that um, living with other people will help you how much you have to pay for rent. But I understand that it's a lot harder to meet newer people after you graduate from college. The other thing is I would say um, living with roommates, you might need to make a sacrifice for 2 or 3 years or some amount of time to be able to help yourself later down the line. So, for example, let's say you move to the cities, you say, "Hey, I really can't afford, you know, $2,500 a month on a $3,000 a month income. I might have to live with some girls from Chi Alpha or live with some guys from a Facebook group that I found for Christians or something like that." And then you can at least lower the amount that you have to pay for rent. I know that because one of the previous roommates that I had, that's what he did. So he looked on a Christian page, found some roommates, started to live with them, and he had a blast with them. They were in his wedding. They were a DJ for him, so all this type of stuff. So there's still cool things that can happen after college, and you can still kind of live that sort of college way. But yes, living with other people will help a lot. Now, with me getting married, it's a little more difficult because then it's only split between Rachel and I's income. And right now it's a different situation. She's still paying her rent. We're now paying for the townhome's rent, so we're actually double paying for rent right now, which is not fun. But but you have to weigh those sacrifices in your life, and that's why personal finance is very dependent on the who and not so much the why.
Yeah, you just have to decide, like, if your income is high enough and you can afford to live on your own and that's important to you, like, you can do it. But also, like, one thing that I think about is like now being married, I miss like the opportunity to live with other girls. Like, I really only did that a couple years in college because then I got married like right after I graduated, you know, so it's like, I would say it's gonna save you money to live with roommates, but also like you guys are still so young and fun, and it's like it's fun and exciting to live with other people too.
That's the
So,
track that I'm on, cause I like,
yeah,
I can't go and buy a couch, or I can't go and buy like appliances,
Yeah.
like, it's nice to like be able to like smooch off.
Yeah.
Roommates that like what they have, and then they can smooch off me of like what I have. And then
That's
still being
fair.
able to, like Nico said, like split costs and different
Yeah.
things. And like
Yeah.
help each other out without actually knowing that's what's happening.
yeah, if you can find roommates that you're comfortable with and a place where you can be together, I think it's a good deal for all of you.
But
I definitely have, like, sorry, I'm like, I definitely have like a different perspective, but I haven't had the best experiences with roommates over the last 4 years. And so for me, and like, I love my independence. So I'm like, I think I said, once I start working full time, like, I really want to get an apartment by myself.
Yeah.
It's like a priority. And I've actually been looking at apartments around Minneapolis, and you can find one bedrooms, like pretty nice places for 1,000 a month. And I'm like, if I'm working full time, I could make it work. Like, cause it's like the priority, like what,
Right, and that's exactly what Nico keeps saying is that it's your own choice.
yeah, and I'm like, maybe one roommate, but honestly, cause I mean, I was in the dorms 2 years, I'm like, I just want my own space, I want my own everything, like just my own place, and so.
Yeah, the one thing that I do want to emphasize is with living with roommates or living by yourself, make sure you have a safe place to live. Make
That's,
sure it's not like, if you're moving to Minneapolis, you're like, oh, it's only $900 a month to live here, but it's like
no,
you're
that's
right
true.
next to like sketchy North Minneapolis
Yeah,
or
I'm looking
you
like
know,
fairly nice places, and I'm like surprised, I said I'm surprised like how you can find a fairly nice place, or like on the outskirts of Minneapolis, that is only 1,000 a month, or like 1,100 a month.
yeah, or living with roommates if there is like a lot of conflict or if there's different frustrations that you're having or certain problems that you arise with roommates, like you don't feel physically safe. That's when I would say personal finance is thrown out the window. You need to find survival first, as
Yeah.
opposed to caring about some stupid budget that Nico told you one time. Don't do that. Make sure you're okay and safe first before you start worrying about this other stuff.
I'm more just tired of like either us not getting along or them not paying me back for like I run like the internet, so like not getting paid for like utilities and stuff. Like I get people like things get hard, but it's frustrating on me when I have other bills to pay. So like
Yeah.
it'd be nice to have my own place where like everything is on me.
Mm.
So I don't have to worry about anyone else. I don't know.
Yep.
But that's a personal thing for me. And I've had roommates the last 4 years, so I'm kind of ready.
Yep.
Mhm. But yeah, everyone's different, and I think priorities. Where are your priorities?
Yeah, you guys have any other things you wanted Nico to talk about or expand on or other questions?
I had one more. I don't know if you had like a job lined up right after college, but was it like something that you looked for a place to live or like first, or did you look for a job first, or they kind of went hand in hand of like, this is where I want to be, so I'm gonna look in this area? Or is it more so like, which one kind of came first, or how did you make that decision? And like, what if one came like secured first, but then the other one was not secure? Cause I think that's where I'm falling, where it's like the housing came and that seems more secure, but then I'm like, I don't got a job yet. But like, it's in the area that I want.
Yeah, so I guess I would say it's so dumb, but I say it depends. The reason why I say it depends is, let's say for example, you get the job first and then the housing comes later. You have the job to be able to supplement having to pay for that rent. So let's say if you make $4,000 a month from your job and then you pay, $1,500 a month for rent, anytime you get that job, you're going to be able to say, hey, I have enough to pay that rent. Finding a job, though, it could be kind of hard. So if you get that house first or apartment first or living scenario first, you might have a harder time finding a job. The one thing I would encourage you, if you do have a place before you have a job, is just making sure that you have enough um, cash to be able to pay for that and be able to weather that time where you don't have that job. So if you can't find a job right after college and it's taking you 2 or 3 months, you say, hey, like I have $10,000 saved up or some number that you need to be able to make sure that you're not going to slip behind on certain things or that you're going to have to dip into credit cards or something like that. Or you can live with your parents. It's not the greatest thing, but there's certain pros and cons to it. So
That's what I'm doing. I'm moving back home until I make a decent amount where I can put, because like when you start like the rent, you usually have to pay like double rent to do that, like
Yep.
a security deposit. So I'm like, I want to make sure I have enough to be able to do that and then start. But
And just I didn't realize this until after college, but most rentals do not ask you to sign 10 months before they want you to live there. A lot of people find somewhere to live anywhere from 1 to 3 months before they need to live, as opposed to like 6 to 10.
Sure.
So
the college
there's a
life
lot
is the
less.
college. Oh man,
Yeah.
yeah.
And often rents aren't. If contracts were they can be year by year, but often they move to month as necessary too. So there's not as much. I would call it scummery, but I mean, college rentals are just looking for income and they need it to build, and the only people who get rent are college students, so
Sure.
that's often our experience with renting, but it's often very different in most of the rest of adult life,
Sure.
so. You should think about it, but it's not the most intense, like,
Yeah,
do I need to get somewhere to rent 6 months before? Probably not.
right. Thank you. Thanks, Nico.
you got it.
I don't think I have any questions. Doing good.
I guess something for an additional thing. If a bonus. So I see Judy there, and the reason why I think about it is because I see Judy there. But so for example, if you have kids eventually, right, and you have a credit score and you're saying, hey, I want to set these kids up well, you can open up a authorized user on your credit card and have a second account, and then they will start building off of your credit, so you can have a longer credit time, or open account history or credit history, as opposed to just being as soon as you are at 18, you can sign it, and then you can start your credit journey. My dad opened up a authorized user account when I was 15 or 16. And he said you can use a credit card, but only in emergency situations. So I think I don't know if there's an age limit or if there's a limit to what you can do, but there is an opportunity for that. So that's why I saw Junie there. If you guys want to open up a authorized user account when she's like 12 or 13 or something like that, she'd be able to build credit off of that.
Yeah.
I
You mean
wish
you don't
my
think I
parents
should
did
give
that.
her a credit card right now?
She could
There'd
buy
probably be a lot of slobber and chewing.
Yeah.
Don't think she, I said earlier, I was
She
like,
would buy so much from
she would
Maybe
Fisher
buy
Price.
And cheese puffs.
Fisher Price would make a ton of money.
No, Nico, I asked her earlier, I said, are you ready to learn about finances? And she's like, yeah. And I said, you don't even know what money is. But I was like,
Okay,
okay.
she has her own wallet and she has credit cards in there and some cash.
I feel like
Put
that
it in a
counts.
purse and she's got,
Like fake old like credit cards.
it's like a toy. My mom got her like this purse that has like
Oh, man.
lipstick and makeup and a wallet and keys and stuff.
That's so cute.
Adulting.
Adulting.
I wish it was sad to see. Right. Okay, well.